It shows how bald the back of my head is. Anyone ever been in like a high flex class where they do both Zoom and in person like at the same
My
time?
high school did that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, how do they set it up on there? Do they show you the Zoom people or?
Well, my instructor just like put the PowerPoint up there and it just shared that. And he had the camera pointing at the classroom, so it felt like we were in there. It was weird.
Well, how are we doing today?
Good.
Yeah. Good. See you for a second time. Go around, give your name. Everyone has to know everyone's name for the next 2 weeks. I'll do it by the end of next week, and then y'all have another week.
I think we're just on that side.
I'm trying to avoid it right now.
I can't do a run through right now. I can get kind of close.
First
I know
and
that this
last.
is 80, so.
Oh, okay, I'm like a celebrity right now. First and last, or just first?
Yeah, the first name's good enough.
And middle name.
Aiden.
Josh.
Anastasia,
Kurdik.
Aaron.
Fabrice.
Tyler.
Alex.
Rose, Michelle, Charlotte, Caitlin,
Mary.
Natalie,
Also Josh. Jason.
Brett.
Aaron.
Abrar.
Noah, we didn't get like
Jeff.
Fabrice's intro.
Yeah, we're gonna get Fabrice's intro.
Intro.
Anybody else not here last time to do the intro?
Cam's gonna miss Fabrice's intro though.
Oh, yeah, should we wait for Cam?
I mean,
Wait,
is he
We
coming?
forgot about the Zoom people.
Oh, yeah, did we get that?
Yeah.
We could go for like voice recognition.
Yeah. Hey,
I know what they sound like.
Natalia or Allison, can you hear me? Yeah, I'm just gonna let that go.
Oh, there's a message in the chat. Oh, there is a message in the chat. The chat stated.
Hi. Hi, Allison. All right, well, hurry up, Cameron.
Oh, there you go.
We were waiting on you for Fabrice to do his intro. So Fabrice, name, year, major, where you're from, something interesting about yourself.
My name is Fabrice Gray. I'm from the DMV area as well. Went to school in DC, but I lived outside the suburbs. I'm doing health policy management. Fun fact about me, I speak 3 languages: English, French, and Haitian Creole.
Nice. French again. Everywhere. Cameron is struggling with a decision whether to continue with French. So,
It's quite difficult.
yeah, no, I think you should.
That sounded
I was
good.
actually just listening to a story on NPR this morning about a guy from Durham, who's apparently a big fashion guy with Vogue. Can't remember his name right now, which is terrible. But he spoke French. He said it helped him a lot.
Maybe I'll become a fashion icon.
There you go. Of course, he was like 6'6", and he liked to wear capes.
Oh, Andre Leon Talley.
There we go.
Yeah.
See, somebody knew. I personally like to wear capes too, but they're frowned upon. And I'm not bold enough.
He's from Durham.
I'm not in the fashion world. Yeah, I know that's what he was on NPR. I mean, he died a while ago. But anyway, so what's that? I haven't checked. Hopefully, people turned in from set 1. I will get those turned around as quickly as I can. Hopefully, I can do it actually this weekend. It just sort of depends because my wife is going to be in Miami. And it depends on whether or not I send my 8-year-old to grandma's house for the weekend. Yeah. Grandma lives in Carver. It's not, and she spends at least one night there every week. That's really not that bad. Also, I don't think did I send out like a topic thing for y'all to fill out? Can't remember. I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a while ago.
Yeah, a long time ago.
yeah.
All right. If you haven't done it, do it just to get yourself thinking about the first draft of the paper. Which is due sometime in the beginning of March. I think I said March 6th last time, which can't be because that's a Saturday. That day's in my head. I was supposed to erase that day that I'm woefully unprepared for. There is a chance on Tuesday that we won't have class. My mom's getting cataract surgery, and I'm waiting to see if anybody else can drive her, and if somebody literally has to sit there the whole time. So we'll see. It's actually not a big deal if we don't, because it's scheduled as a data analysis, intro to data analysis, and we pretty much already did all that when we did assembling evidence. So it would be kind of a fun discussion class anyway. If we don't have class, you will have like an alternate assignment. I have a really kind of interesting article for you that then you would just write a short bit about. Okay. I think that's it in terms of course stuff. Any questions?
How in depth are you supposed to go with the problem set answers? Like, I like the short answer. I didn't really know how.
Yeah, short answers, it's usually like 4 or 5 sentences.
Okay.
It can't be much longer. It can be much shorter. Yeah, I probably could have given you a little bit more instruction on that. So the thing about it is, you know, I mean, it's obviously there's multiple choice, fill in the blank, short answer. That's essentially what exams look like. So it's really giving you practice on the types of exam questions that I ask. Exams in particular, you're encouraged on short answers to like do bullet points and that kind of thing. I'm not looking for grammatical, you know, high level English writing. But anyhow. Question. One random thing I forgot to mention, Rose, my daughter's middle name. Rose. So.
My middle name. I
Is
don't
it?
go by my personal name.
Oh, okay. Do you want to tell us your first name?
It's Grayson.
Grayson. Nice. Do you not do it because of Grayson Allen, or do you not know who that is? Good for you. Keep it that way.
Speaking of, if anyone would like a phase 5 ticket.
Isn't that like top row?
No difference.
I don't know. In my day, you actually had to go stand in line and to get tickets. I don't know, it's a lottery nonsense where you get people who don't really care about the games going.
Well, if we used to do that too, like kind of, like, they do the lottery, they stand in line, then they stop doing it.
Well, that's also code. But no, we used to have the camping out stuff too, like they do in Shashevskyville. My wife used to do it. I never did. I love Carolina basketball. Most of the time though, I'd rather watch it on TV where I can actually see it. Probably enough wasting time. Today, we're gonna get at kind of an overarching question in public policy, right? This idea that we're somehow trying to make life better, trying to improve social welfare in some way. Here's not gonna work. Technology. So we're trying to maximize public welfare, but we don't have a good way of actually measuring it. Right? It's hard to put a number on social welfare as a whole. One of the big problems that we face in public policy, and this is where policy and econ tend to diverge a little bit in the standards that we use, is that there's always winners and losers. There's going to be people who benefit from a policy, and there's going to be people who lose out. Even if that losing out just means the spending of their tax dollars, especially if it's in a way that they don't approve of. And so it's difficult then to figure out what the right decision is, right? How do we make trade-offs between individuals, between populations, between these winners and losers? The short answer really is politics. Yeah, but we're trying to figure out ways to do it in a more objective way. And really all we can do is highlight the trade-offs. Yeah. And then, what happens if we're in a situation where an overarching policy clearly has like a net gain? If you think about cost benefit analysis, the net benefits outweigh the costs, but those costs, say, are concentrated in a small group of people and they are substantial. Right? What do we do in those scenarios? Classic example is any kind of free trade agreement, be it NAFTA or whatever the one that they did and to replace NAFTA. Free trade agreements are without question economically efficient. There is a net social gain. Okay, but the gains go to capital and the losses go to labor. And so then you've got to figure out, what do we do? Do we compensate them in some way, right? Do we give them job training assistance, extended unemployment, whatever, to do it? And so we always sort of ponder this question. That always makes me think of Albus Dumbledore, of the common good trumping individual rights. Anybody tell me the Dumbledore reference?
I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, and I just
And you can't? He was friends with that Grindelwald guy. And that was what Grindelwald was all about, the public good.
so you're going like to the newest of the movies, like the Strange Beast.
I'm talking about books, man. Books. Which, for the record, does anybody listen to audiobooks? That you should, right? You can actually listen to something and be entertained while you're walking around campus without staring at your freaking screen and running into me. So that would be nice. But anyway, the best audiobook of all time is the Harry Potter series. The guy who reads them is just phenomenal. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today are some ways that we try to approximate some measure of social welfare. And then we're going to get into the specifics of how we do it in policy analysis. Since it's not directly observable, we have to find something that essentially indicates its presence. And obviously these are called indicators. they're never gonna be perfect, because it's not a direct measurement, but it's kind of all we've got. A single indicator, like gross domestic product, is usually going to be woefully insufficient. So we can improve its validity by adding other variables into it, creating an index of indicators. Yeah. Lots of times what we will do is we'll take like 7, 8 variables, we'll, using theory, right, decide which ones are sort of the most important, and we'll give them more weight. And we'll create a formula that gives us an index. And I'll give you an example in a minute. An indicator itself, like poverty, right? You can't really directly observe or quantify poverty. So we create an indicator variable, which is income. And we use that to say you're poor or you're not poor. An index would be something like the Gini coefficient. Anybody ever heard of that before? So it's a measure, not directly of poverty, it's an indicator, it's an index of inequality. Remember I said we care more about relative measures than absolute measures? Well, inequality is a relative measure. So just show you on the left, you've got percentage of people living in poverty. The redder it is, the poorer it is, right? No real surprise down here as it goes. Is that upsetting to you, Cameron?
Yeah, man, I love the South. Why are we so poor?
It's a great question. Lots of people trying to figure it out and do something about it. But so you can see, you know, sort of general thing. This over here is the Gini coefficient. So a measure of inequality. It's lots of different things going together, access to healthcare, access to education, all kinds of things like that are then weighted, and it's given a number, a numerical value between 0 and 100. Okay, where 0, or I think maybe it's 1, means like one person has everything. And 100 means everybody essentially has an equal share. So look at that map, and you can compare it with poverty. What's interesting about that? Aaron,
What's up with New York? Like,
what is up in New York?
it's pretty, it's like the darkest black I've ever seen in my life.
Yes, it is. New York is by far the most unequal state. Yeah. So you see it there. You can see it's sort of in the middle when it comes to poverty. So what does that say? Yeah.
I thought you said that like the higher the number, the more spread out the wealth is.
Oh, I got it reversed.
So what is it?
So the darker it is, the more unequal it is. Yeah, my bad. Well, yeah.
I was just gonna say Texas is kind of sus either way you look at it.
Yeah, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. What's going on in New York? I mean, nobody in here is from New York, but yeah.
Especially in New York City, where like most of the population is concentrated, there are like extreme wealth gaps between like the extremely rich individuals in the city. And
Right.
all-
I mean, you have Wall Street, right? You have Manhattan, you have all the investment bankers, all the people out in Long Island. All right, you have these areas of highly concentrated wealth. What most people who aren't from New York don't really understand is, yeah, there's like the Bronx and other places sort of around the city. Most of New York is rural and poor. And so, you know, you look at something like that, and New York's like, yeah, we're doing okay. Then you look at that, and you see that there might actually be some real problems in terms of social stability.
What about like California? Wouldn't it be the same thing? Like the people who live in like Malibu, the hills and all that, and then everyone else, like, shouldn't it be similar?
It's an excellent question. Anybody think of an answer? Gosh,
In my mind, like, there's a, like you said, New York is like a lot of rural like area, and I'm sure like a lot of upstate is kind of similar to like the Rust Belt. Whereas California, like the cost of living is so high that I feel like even though there are a lot of poor people, there's probably also like just a ton of like middle class people that
if you're going by pure income, like their income might be slightly higher. But also, it's just, you know, it's also reflective of the type of rural communities that exist. Right? I mean, how many of our fruits and vegetables come from New York State? Not that many. California sends us a lot of stuff. You can even think about rural areas in California that are like wineries, right? Almond farms, other things that actually produce decent income. There's a lot of poverty in California, don't get me wrong, but there's not the same spread that there is in New York, Texas, some other places. Personally, you know, you think, you know, about the South in general, you know, I think it's intriguing, you know, that Alabama isn't quite as poor there, but is just as unequal. Having lived there, that is very much true, right? I lived in Huntsville, Alabama, which is in the northern part of the state, sort of like right there. It's actually where NASA is. One of the places, but it was where NASA started. Has the highest concentration of engineers like anywhere. Also has the highest rate of people on the autism spectrum disorder of anywhere, and that's not a coincidence. Random fact for you too, Alabama is the most biologically diverse state in the US. Who would have known?
I don't know if that's. Yeah, what do you mean by biologically diverse?
Like number of species.
I feel like there's a lot of just.
See, I feel like you all have a lot. I feel like it's a Wikipedia. There's some different breeds down there. Somebody.
Humans count as one species.
Biodiverse.
That would be.
It has to do with, there is a lot of very different geography in Alabama. There's a lot of natural open spaces in Alabama too. Least biodiverse state is Iowa.
Oh.
It's just all corn. And then there's only certain birds that can like live around there, because it's just all corn. Okay. But I digress.
Isn't Iowa also like the highest state? Is it Maine?
I don't know.
I might be tripping.
I would, that's not what I wanted. Back. Some other indicators, you know, that the Wheelan book talks about a little bit, and I just want to go over because they are so commonly used, are gross domestic product and life expectancy as indicators of overall well-being, social welfare. You know, there's lots of life expectancy. You can just sort of see it's broken down between men and women, by the way. And, you know, this is sort of over time, like different countries. And, you know, you have these people, you know, down here, goes up. Generally speaking, up in this range is going to be Europe, Japan, places like that. This is Africa. Well, most of Africa. These ones down here, anytime you see the lowest one on here, it's usually Niger or one of those countries in Africa. And you can see how low for men it is in some places. GDP, I do want to point out, like GDP per capita is often used, especially when we're comparing countries, right? Who has the highest GDP per capita?
Like Luxembourg or something like that.
Isn't it
Someone
like,
else.
like one of the Middle Eastern oil
I think
companies?
it's like, maybe UAE, United Arab Emirates now, Qatar. Yeah, for a long time though, it was the US. And the US had the highest GDP for a long time. That's no longer true. China has the highest GDP now, but our GDP per capita is way higher than China's. Right, so if you think about well-being, overall social welfare, I think that's a good example to keep in the back of your mind. You know, think about sort of the average person living in the United States versus the average person living in China. Right, economically speaking, it's completely different worlds. Has anybody ever been to China? Yeah, how was it?
It was really cool. I went like the summer after my freshman year of high school,
Uh-huh.
and like it was the first time I'd been out of the country.
A little bit of a shock.
Yeah, it was pretty, but it was like good though.
Where were you?
I was in Beijing, and then the coolest part was probably we went like 4 hours outside to like Hunan, and we stayed on like a random farm, and that was like, it was the only place I felt where I was like, someone could commit a crime here and no one would ever find out. Like no one would ever find out. It was very remote.
Were there toilets?
No, you had to squat.
Yeah.
And then we did
Hole in the
like dude, you drive up the road and there's like just like parts of the Great Wall like right by the road.
That's really cool.
It's very interesting.
I was in China in 1991.
That's cool.
Which it was apparently a very different country at that time. I remember a lot of honking. That's true in lots of other places in the world. People honk their horns a whole lot more than they do. It's just a part of driving. But anyhow, I ate at the world's largest Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yeah,
Was
so
it
it's
better?
like a staple, like Japanese culture, like people get like reservations for
Yeah, it's like,
Christmas.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's like different though. Like it's like a sit down restaurant.
Well, what I want to point out about GDP per capita is that there have been some moves in the last 20 years, especially in the last 10 years by mostly academics to get away from GDP per capita because it does hide distributional effects. Like it does better than just GDP, right? But you know, you can still have extreme poverty in places with high GDP per capita. And so people are trying to come up with other ways of measuring well-being. So I gave you a YouTube video here if you want to check it out. Want to just sort of show you the relationship between GDP and median income in the US. And so you can see, you know, this is recent. I'm not even going back that far, but 93 sort of on GDP, median income, sort of the same. And then this balloons up. Median income drops. And we were lower in 2014, we're lower now than we were in 1998. That's an important message, right? So we can talk about GDP all day long and showing that we're doing better as a society. But to me, median income is a better indicator of everybody. Wanted to show you the difference between different ways of measuring income too, since we do use it for lots of things. This is a little bit dated, but it's the best one I could find in terms of showing the difference. Where I'll let you, hopefully you can read what these are. This up here is GDP per employed person. So it's not even per capita. Then you get average household, average family, average household, and then median, right? This is why we don't use the average. Because it's totally, it gets skewed by super rich people. But, you know, it's a pretty big difference between up here and down here. And so which measure you use tells a different story. Even though each measure in and of itself is legitimate. This is something I personally I find this whole topic interesting, how we capture well-being. And Gallup actually has a website that has different collections of all of these things. If you want to check them out, to show you how to set strengths-based goals. What does that have to do with what? Okay. They're clearly changing to more individual well-being. Maybe they've given up on social well-being. But no, I thought it would be kind of a fun exercise to think through, right? Like, what to y'all is an indicator of well-being? What variables would you use if you were creating an index? Noah?
Life expectancy.
You think life expectancy is a good one? What are some pluses and minuses of life expectancy?
Is that like a to the class question or to me?
Whole class.
A minus is it just like tells how long you're expected to live, not necessarily how you're doing in life.
Okay, so it's about quantity and not quality. Michelle?
It can be skewed by people that have money and thus have access to healthcare.
Yeah, there's also the chance for it being skewed based on income, because we know income and life expectancy are highly correlated. Let me get critic and I'll get back to you, John.
Well, I was gonna say another one, but
Okay.
I personally use body fat composition because people who tend to have less body fat and more like muscle,
Is this as a separate variable or as part of life expectancy?
separate variable. Yeah, people who tend to have lower fat ratios tend to eat healthier and have more muscle mass, so they tend to live.
But are they happier?
I mean, both seem to be happy.
Is that an overall indication of societal well-being? If we take the average body fat,
It's not really a measure of societal well-being as more of physical well-being.
so it's an indicator of physical well-being, which we can use for general. Generally, if we're physically well, we tend to be more mentally well, and the reverse is true too. Josh has his hand up, and then I'll get to the other Josh.
I was just gonna say, like, life expectancy, like some pros are like, if on average life expectancy is higher, that means like on average, more people have access to healthcare, nutritious foods, like just the general resources you would need to have a longer life.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I was just gonna say, education as another one.
Education. Yeah, another thing about life expectancy, or Michelle, what were you gonna say? It also gets messed up as a measure when you have larger numbers of young people dying, especially where there's high infant mortality, maternal mortality, anywhere where there's civil conflict, right? All of those things mess up this measure. Now, maybe that is not a bad thing in terms of capturing overall social well-being, because if there is some kind of civil conflict, well, they're not doing very well. Education. Why education?
if the population's more educated, then I think it's just only an asset to like improving the rest of your life. Like you can earn income, which you can pay for healthcare and food.
Yeah, it's in lots of ways, it's kind of a representative variable of other things. And we haven't even put income on here. But you can start to see somehow how it gets complicated to create these things because they're very interrelated. And you have to account for that. And you're, Aiden?
I don't know, I just kind of thought this on a whim, but maybe like medical debt as an indicator.
Medical debt. Interesting. It's gonna be complicated, right? Because it depends on so many other factors, like income, education, connections. Right? Like I don't have to go into much medical debt because my wife is a nurse, my dad's a doctor. You know, and so I can get some things taken care of. What are some other things?
I was gonna say, like, it's kind of, I thought about this earlier, with body fat percentage, I feel like people who are like, have the lowest body fat are like, might be some of the unhappiest people, or like have the least well.
That is exactly what I was
I mean, like,
thinking.
if you take the social, like the body fat percentage of like some third world developing country, it's gonna be low, but they're not having a good, they might not have a good.
No, I was thinking
Well,
about
maybe
Scorpio.
a ratio might solve that.
Yeah,
Body fat to muscle mass.
Oh, sure, body fat to muscle mass, that's a good one.
Well, and there's different ways of measuring body fat that, you know, may be an indicator of overall sort of well-being.
Gender inequality.
Gender inequality. And this is again where an aggregate measure is hiding lots of stuff. So if you have education, for example, as one of your variables going into the index, in some countries, it's going to be relatively consistent across gender. In some countries, it's going to be way different. Yeah. So, yes,
The mortality rate of women who died during childbirth.
I'm just going to call it maternal mortality. Yeah. Anything else? A lot of people have said the word, but no one wants to say it. Happiness.
How do you quantify what happened and how happy you are?
How do you quantify it?
Like what, a survey?
I've been looking at that this whole conversation.
What's that reverse?
I've been looking at happiness this whole conversation.
Oh, yeah.
So Bhutan did it.
That is their official measure, in fact.
Exactly. So they did psychological well-being, health, education, time use, culture, diversity and resilience, good governance, community vitality, ecological diversity and resilience, and living standards. I don't know exactly how.
Ecological diversity, Alabama.
Yeah.
And who according to that is the happiest country on earth?
It was, I think it's Finland. That's what I've been seeing.
Usually it's Bhutan themselves.
Oh.
They got engineered the formula to make it seem like their people are the happiest on earth.
Where
But-
is that?
Bhutan,
Yeah.
it is kind of near Mongolia, I think.
Just, is it
No, it's
Asian?
Is this,
No, it's like, I think it's between like China and like India, it's like near Nepal, I think.
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
kind of near Mongolia.
And what, no, Mongolia is like above China. Russia.
Yeah, well, it's in that part of the world.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Look, you know, there are a lot of researchers actually right now, and there was a popular book for a while about happiness. A couple of economists came out with a book of how you can measure happiness and that kind of thing. It was really trendy for 5-7 years. But, you know, it seems like that would be a great measure if we could figure out how to measure it. Yeah.
I was about to say, because a lot of the measures of happiness that I've looked at, like in studies and stuff, have been like disproportionately skewed towards like the Scandinavian countries because they have like more homogeny in their population, so it's much easier to get things done in terms of policy perspective because they have
Yeah,
very similar like cultural standards and values.
right. Yeah, I mean, homogeneity is one of the problems that comes in with all this stuff. Makes it difficult to compare. I thought I saw another hand over here.
Yeah, I was just like, what's the, like, what would be your distinction between happiness and social welfare? I kind of view those like as similar ideas.
That's the whole point. It's like we're trying to measure social welfare. I'm saying this is my indicator.
That's like, that would be like the only, it's like.
And then I have to figure out what all, right, you know, mental well-being.
Even when you measure happiness, you have to take into account, like, certain things can make people happy that just don't go to the social welfare, like if you smoke, that can make you happy. Or like it's still bad for you and it's bad for the people around you.
You know, as Cheryl Crow once said, if it makes you happy, it can't be that bad.
But does it
What
go to
about meth users?
Literally. What about serial
See,
killers?
but now, see that now you're talking, then you start talking about like addiction, right? Which then gets into mental illness, and mental illness makes you decidedly unhappy. You know, there's all kinds of, my whole point is it's complicated, right? This is a difficult endeavor to figure out, and yet we need to do this for public policy analysis. If that's our goal, we have to have some way of measuring it, right? So typically, this thing's gonna drive me nuts.
Just click the little, the one line to the left.
Well, I kind of want to remember that Natalia and Allison are out there.
It's like a message in the chat. I don't know how long it's been there for a while.
Ah, it's Allison saying hi.
No, you saw that.
Oh, we got another one, new chat,
Maybe it was kind of like responding.
new chat.
All right, well, here's the deal. In public policy, we borrow a lot and we rely a lot on economic theory. And so the primary measure that we use is one of efficiency. And as I said, this is really important. This is kind of foundational to all public policy. And it is where public policy differs from most economics in the actual measurement of efficiency that we use. Okay, economics really focuses on what's known as Pareto efficiency, Pareto optimality. Pareto was just an Italian dude, but he sort of started this idea that individuals and societies should make decisions that make them better off and make no one worse off. So any kind of transaction, somebody is better off and nobody is worse off. Okay, so a Pareto improving decision, meaning getting closer towards efficiency, is one that does that. If it makes anybody worse off, it doesn't satisfy the Pareto criteria. Right, and they shouldn't engage in that transaction. Okay. Problem is, this is relying on several assumptions of market theory, such as the fact that all transactions are voluntary. And that's obviously not true in public policy. We're not all voluntarily subjecting ourselves to these things, right? Of course, the Constitution sort of seems to say that, you know, we, the people of these United States. But the bottom line is these scenarios, whenever you're talking about a group decision, the decision that affects a group of people, are very, very rare. And it just doesn't happen, as I said earlier, because there are winners and losers. So we fall back on what economists kind of look down on which is known as Calder-Hicks optimality or Calder-Hicks efficiency. Again, it's just two guys, Calder and Hicks. And this is the foundation. And the bottom line is if the net social gains outweigh the net social costs, then we should do it. Or it is a, efficiency improving decision from a social welfare point of view. The theory behind this is, right, that let's say, and I'm just making, numbers up to make it easy. Let's say the net social benefits are $100 trillion or something. And that the costs are $50 trillion. Right? In theory, we could take half of those benefits and compensate the people who are losing out. We could wipe out that 50, and we'd still have a $50 trillion gain. Very important to understand that this compensation principle, as it's called, is entirely theoretical. You don't actually have to do it from a policy point of view. It just has to be possible. And anytime net benefits exceed net costs, it's possible. So if you go back to my NAFTA example, it would be taking some of those excess benefits, not excess, but additional benefits, and putting it into job training programs, putting it into community colleges, putting it into extended unemployment insurance and other things like that, to try to make the people who are losing out from it whole. But anybody, well, yeah, y'all are probably too young now, as I've been teaching for a while. But anybody who is from an area of North Carolina that used to be predominantly textiles, you know very well that they weren't compensated, or they weren't compensated enough. Because NAFTA wiped out the textile industry in North Carolina, which used to be very, very big. But even though there was a huge social gain, there were discrete, identifiable pockets of people who were harmed. But it still met this criteria. So it's kind of harsh in some ways, but it's all we have. And it's important to just sort of understand that economic theory doesn't care about equity. It's just not a part of the equations. That has to come from somewhere else. And I'm not saying it's not important. It is, just on general principles, but then also if you want to look at political feasibility and social acceptability and all of these types of things, you can't just be pissing people off all the time. Yeah. So this is what we use in public policy, Calder-Hicks. And we'll come back, we're going to see Hicks again later on in the semester when we talk about Hicksian demand curves. But yeah. Any questions? Okay, I'm just going to introduce this notion of deadweight loss, and then Noah said he had a really good random fact for us today. I'm just going to introduce this. Don't think too hard about it. We're going to come back to it later on. But it's important to understand that anytime government is intervening in sort of economic affairs, even with a Calder-Hicks improving decision, there is going to be some loss that simply exists. And we can't do anything about it. And that's called deadweight loss. Minimizing deadweight loss is what we're trying to do, right? Not get rid of it. But so you think about a whole bunch of different sort of policies out there. So I've got monopoly pricing, any kind of wage floor or ceiling, like a price ceiling, You see sometimes with rent control or minimum wage. All of those things involve dead weight loss from an economic point of view, which means they can't be fully efficient. I just want to plant that seed in your head. And we'll come back to it later on, and we'll do these graphs where, you know, I show you where the dead weight loss is. Cameron's eyes just shut, by the way. He said, I don't want to see that. Is that right?
I got Econ 101 like 9 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There it is.
You said you got for 5 minutes, what did you say?
I said I have Econ 101 nightmares.
Yeah, true, who's your teacher?
Valid.
Stop. Did we talk about this already? I think I already.
Yeah, it's the same class, basically.
Yeah, but
No, there's a very big difference. No, I like stuff. Like, I think she was a good professor.
Oh, yeah, we had this conversation.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
We did.
We'll come back to Econ 101 when we talk about classrooms. But yeah. I think you were part of the dead weight loss.
Yeah, true.
All right, so, all right, no, give us your random fact. I heard it's math.
When they originally measured the height of Mount Everest, they got it at 29,000 feet, like exactly. But the people who measured it thought that like no one would believe them, since it was exactly 29,000 feet. So they made it 29,002 feet. Yeah.
I didn't even.
Well, I mean, why would they do that?
Would you believe it if I said it's 29,000 feet exactly?
No,
Like
but then
that precise?
No, but then I'd be like, I don't believe you, and then you'd like.
Exactly, so that's why they added the two
It's
on.
actually 20,000.
Well, I wouldn't believe you that it's.
Now I don't believe you this one, yeah.
29,000 is like a suspicious.
As suspicious as 29,000, like, that just sounds like a guess, you know?
I don't know. It's just really high.
It was 29,032.
You're bullshit.
What, does it
Did it
grow?
It grew 32 feet in the past couple hundred years.
Y'all act like it's not possible. You not understand geology?
Yeah, no, dude. I was in Geology 101 last semester. It was my favorite class.
You have.
It was originally 29,028 feet.
I'm not making this up, okay?
I know. You have these plates, right?
They don't grow that fast.
Yeah.
30 feet. And as they move in,
1856, they
it
measured
pushes
it
this
at
up.
29,002 feet, but it's actually only 29,000.
Yeah, there's no way it grows 30 feet in 70 years.
I don't know if it's 7 years. I have no idea what the difference is in those measurements. I'm just
Oh, I
saying.
thought you meant 1950.
The idea that Mount Everest is static in its height
Well,
is
it's not
just,
static, but
it's
it's
just
not growing at
false.
32 feet in 100 years.
well, you never know.
You never know.
San Andreas moves pretty fast. Sorry. My mom was my earth science teacher in 9th grade.
Is that weird?
It's fun. I went to a tiny little school. I wasn't the only one with a parent teacher. All right. Anybody else have anything random they want to talk about before we move on? There's not really a whole lot more. I do want to talk about equity, right? Because it is important. And it's important to be able to separate in your mind the sort of econ approaches to stuff and the equity side of things. And yes, there are ways that you can include sort of equity variables in various formulae. But I want to make sure that everybody understands what equity is. Yeah, so we're talking about fairness. Okay, we're not talking about equality. Equity means fairness. And there's a couple of different ways in which we can measure equity that can be important when you're looking at things like political feasibility and social acceptability and, you know, other criteria that we use in this class and when we're doing policy analyses. Horizontal equity is just this idea that it's the difference, right, of people similarly situated being treated equally or not. So similarly situated is the key thing there. You know, if you look, this is one of the problems a lot of people would argue with our absolute poverty line. Because, you know, making $500 less than the poverty line and making $500 more, I would say you are similarly situated. And yet, one person has access to lots of public benefits and the other person doesn't. You saw this a lot with the Affordable Care Act and the subsidies and the way it played out of who was eligible for subsidies and at what level. And, you know, eventually you sort of plateau out. And it was just 400% of the poverty line. And so there were a lot of people, especially a lot of people who had their own businesses, who made too much money to get a healthcare subsidy, but didn't make enough money to be able to, for example, give their employees healthcare insurance. And so it squeezed that segment of society. So that's horizontal equity. Vertical has to do with this general notion that better off people have somewhat of a larger responsibility when it comes to paying for social goods. So you see this in our income taxes, right? We have a progressive income tax system where, you know, the first $10,000 is untaxed. The next, you know, $25,000 is taxed at one rate. The next 50,000 is taxed at another rate. The next whatever is taxed at another rate. Yeah. And that is seen as satisfying vertical equity. Yeah. Some people say, well, you know, it might violate horizontal equity because if you're right on the line, that's problematic. But what most people don't understand about a progressive income tax is that you're only paying the higher rate on the money that's above that amount. You're not paying it on all of your income. So if the highest bracket is 35%, you're only paying 35% tax on any income above like $125,000, not on that first 125. You hear lots of arguments in politics and this kind of stuff about tax rates and how they might incentivize people not to work as much. Just for the record, those have never proven to be true. So. One thing that we're going to talk a decent amount in this class about that people often forget is this notion of intergenerational equity. Because a lot of policy programs are projected out a fairly large number of years in terms of the costs and the benefits. And obviously this is true with climate change, right? Arguably the biggest sort of policy topic of well, post-pandemic times. That's not the biggest. Anyway, I'll shut up. But it's important to think about how things are going to affect different generations. There are lots of times arguments about, well, you know, we want future generations to actually have fish to eat or have various natural resources and clean air to breathe versus current generations' ability to have jobs. Okay, so when we do cost benefit analysis, you're going to see that one of the formulae that we use is actually discounting future costs and future benefits so that they're not worth the same amount as things today. And there's a lot of debate as to how much you should discount them and that kind of thing. But we are such short-term focused beings that we often forget about long-term effects. This is one nice thing about having kids. At least you're thinking about the next generation. You know, when you have kids. But any questions on that? You know, this is also one of the arguments that people make against affirmative action. Well, it wasn't us, it was our grandparents, right? That's intergenerational equity arguments. All right, so bottom line is, when I'm talking about equity, I'm talking about fairness, and just want everyone to recognize the fact that we all have different definitions of what's fair and what's not. That's what I think the right definition is. That's probably what Josh thinks it is, right? Anastasia, whoever. I'm not getting into details. How many of you had policy 340? Oh yeah. So do you want to break down the roles of music?
Well, justice is fairness. That's a lot.
I know, that's why I'm not really gonna get into it. Just know that there are various extremes. You can think about communism, libertarianism, communism being sort of full government control of resources, libertarianism being minimal government control.
It's like Ron Swanson, right?
Ron Swanson, there you go. Yeah. Good, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a better example. Most people don't know who John Rawls is. Although he wouldn't be Ron Swanson, that would be Nozick. John Rawls is one of the more famous sort of political philosophers of the last 50 years. And he has this basic argument that I think is very compelling, which is the way to get good public policy is to have the people making it not know what their station in life is. It's a thought experiment. Obviously, there's no way we can make people forget who they are. Right? We can't make them know if they're, you know, a man, a woman, black, white, rich, poor, etc. Okay? But if people could pretend that they didn't know, then they would make decisions that were actually fair for everyone. Right? Operating under this veil of ignorance. You know, that often, a lot of people say that Rawls is focused on outcomes, on fair outcomes. I don't really think that's entirely true, but it doesn't matter for right now. Nozick, on the other hand, I'm not going to get into his theory, but he's more libertarian. So instead of outcomes, he's all about process. And this will be a theme that's repeated later on in the semester too. Fair process versus fair outcomes. And you can sort of go back to our discussion of science and knowledge production, of agreeing on the process. You know? But a lot of people argue as long as the process is fair, doesn't matter what the outcome is. Then there's differences as to what a fair process is. One of my favorite sort of analogies when it comes to describing equity and equality and this kind of stuff comes from Deborah Stone, who was a political scientist at Duke. She used the example of a chocolate cake. Imagine we had a giant chocolate cake and we're trying to figure out how to divide it up. What's fair? Somebody give me a way of dividing it that's fair. No?
You ask who wants cake, and then you divide it equally,
So you ask who wants cake and then you divide it equally
based on who wants it, yeah.
based on who wants it. Okay.
I'm pretty hungry though. I haven't eaten all day.
You haven't eaten all day,
Yeah, I'm pretty hungry.
so you should get more.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
Maybe divided proportionate to how much people who put into it
Oh,
contributed.
labor theory here. Labor theory of value. Okay, assume nobody in this class put any labor into it. Say I made it. And I brought it in. I can't eat it because I can't eat gluten. Which sucks. Don't eat a whole lot of processed foods. Because I am convinced that that is what's making a lot of people my age become gluten insensitive. Okay. There's gotta be some other ways.
Like sustenance, like they still,
Sustenance.
yeah, like if they're like, say like kids in here, like probably give a kid the exact same amount as like a full size.
So whoever needs more calories
Yeah.
takes it that way. What about athletes?
Actually,
Do they get more? Does they burn more?
What if you decided because your height,
I mean, Michael Phelps used to eat 9,000 calories a day.
What if they're a bench rider?
He still has to practice. So,
I was gonna say, just ask them how much cake they want.
just ask people how much they want. That's crazy.
what if someone wants the whole cake?
yeah, so
Yeah, what if the first person wants?
Then
the
it
whole
has to
cake?
do with
Then
who
it's
gets to
not.
make the decision first,
Oh.
right? So the whole point, right, is people are gonna have different definitions. And it's very hard to convince people that they're wrong. Right, as Noah just pointed out.
I could be wrong.
So one of the things that we always have to keep in mind is this kind of inevitable trade-off between efficiency and equity. Okay, when we're focused more on efficiency, we're probably going to be sacrificing some equity. Okay. And markets, and when we're doing market-based policy tools, okay, it's really only looking at efficiency. And so we have to add the layer of equity to our analysis. Because a purely efficiency-based analysis is, from my perspective, just insufficient. The other thing that you sort of keep in the back of your mind is markets are really good at efficiently allocating resources given an initial allocation of resources. And that initial allocation of resources is going to be unequal, or it is unequal. And so we need to think about, do we alter things based on that initial starting point? And so that's why we stick with this sort of notion of procedural fairness, because we can't really agree. All right. Any questions? Just take a couple minutes and just introduce the idea to you of income redistribution, not as an equity argument, but as an efficiency argument. Most people come at it from a fairness point of view. If you look at household income, this is from 2015, but you know it's just gotten worse since then. This is why I say it's not normally distributed. Yeah, you have these people down here, and look, median income is way down here. It seems like there might be an argument to be made, right? Especially once you take wealth into account, that taking these people down to here and bringing these people up might actually be economically efficient. Because once you make a certain amount of money, you tend not to spend it as much. People down here, if they spend it, well, that goes back into the economy and it spreads it out a little bit more. So I was reading this morning, I don't, do y'all get the well? That email from the university where they make themselves look really good? Because you're spam. There is from time to time something interesting in there. Oh, yeah. You're gonna see something from the well on your exam. Yeah, it's gonna be the basis of one of my questions. So you can go and look through all the well articles you want, and see if you can guess which one it is. Guaranteed you won't. Fabrice?
Why would making the graph look more normally distributed? How does that mean that we're more economically efficient?
So essentially, you're taking income from here and you're putting it down, you know, somewhere down here where it's gonna get spent. When it gets spent, that creates jobs, creates tax revenue,
Gets spent.
you know, it creates all these other things. So I was reading the well about the predicted monumental impact of Apple coming to RTP. So y'all are you aware that Apple is building a new complex in RTP? And the numbers are just, it's, you know, like 3,000 jobs, but it's billions and billions and billions of dollars in expected gain to the economy. But then there's other bad things, right? Like housing prices are gonna go up. Anyway, pretty fascinating stuff. So lots of it would come down to framing. I don't really think much for that. This is a way to look at it from the other side. Okay, so yes, these people make a lot more money, but their burden of the tax share is a whole lot higher. You know, up 1%, 24% of our overall tax revenue when it comes to income tax. And that's even with them avoiding a lot of taxes. Just think if we actually enforced all of the tax laws. Anyhow, that's all I got for you. Any last minute thoughts, questions? I will let you know as soon as I know Tuesday. And I hope you have a good weekend. I hope we meet you. Will? Oh, we will. Yeah.